Here, hold on, share, there we go. And let's see if this will work. All right, are you seeing my screen now? I hope, okay, great. All right, so design at Rolling Stone. I mean, I'd like to start with just some basic fundamentals, which I'm sure you guys already know, but it helps as I walk through this presentation to go through certain things. And, you know, one of the questions is, why is design important? And I think we all know why. You know, it's how people access information. It's how people experience the products. I mean, design in all forms is super important. But as it relates to editorial and advertising design, you know, I love this quote. It was in Stephen Heller's book, The Education of an Art Director. This quote here: design communicates the voice, mood, and concept of the magazine or newspaper or website, and of each article. So there's two things going on here. There's the big picture thing. What is your publication all about? You know, what is the main thrust of your publication? Are you like a service publication where you need to be practical and useful? Or are you a luxurious fashion magazine where it's all about atmosphere and desirability? And that, you know, the design needs to communicate that big overarching theme, as well as when you start designing each particular story, you need to communicate what that article is about and think in terms of how best do I communicate that information to the reader? How do I best illustrate, you know, if this is a deep investigative story, what are the key points that I need to highlight for the reader to communicate what the message of this deep investigative story is all about? So it's like this big macro thing, branding, if you will, and also micro, which is just as important, which is how to guide readers through the information. So we'll get into some of that stuff as it relates to Rolling Stone, and hopefully it'll be applicable. I mean, when I joined Rolling Stone and when I joined the Los Angeles Times and the Baltimore Sun, I kind of look back. These are very established brands, and I looked back in time, like what is their history? And try to really learn and immerse myself in the DNA of that publication. What were its highlights and lowlights? How did it start? And then what did the design look like as the design progressed at these publications? Because a lot of these publications have there's some unique quirkiness that either continued throughout time or was there at the beginning, and maybe that could be a source of inspiration to really reinvigorate the brand. So, you know, at Rolling Stone, its main focus was music and all the things that affect music, and applying serious journalism to those things. So really in-depth reporting on music, but then of course music is influenced by culture and politics. So in-depth reporting on culture and politics, and do it in a way, at the time when Rolling Stone was founded, do it in a way that no other journalistic institution was doing. And as you can see, it started out as a newspaper. You know, it came and it was printed on newsprint. You know, the logo is a classic logo from the 60s era, that kind of style. Rick Griffin did that. And as you look closely in the design, there are certain things that you'll see crop up in later years, like the Oxford rule framing everything. And so this was all probably because Rolling Stone started with a very low budget. They didn't have much money, and they did the best they could. And they used certain things to kind of give their page a distinct look. In fact, that Rick Griffin logo was drawn on a little scrap sheet of paper, and Rick never intended this to be printed. But Jan, the founder of the magazine, said, that looks great, let's go with it right now. And they just put it right on the page. And you know, so you can see it has all the quirks, and you know, it's a sketch. It wasn't really meant to be for real, but look at what it became as the Rolling Stone logo progressed over time. We'll get into that too. But as you can see, as the magazine, this is now, so the magazine was founded in 1967. These are now covers of the magazine, and it just shows how it progressed into the late 70s. I think this was during Roger Black's era. And as you can see, the Oxford rule is still there. It's still framing that front page, now a magazine cover, but and that Oxford is just kind of exaggerated. You know, it's got color in it now. But that same principle is there, even though it is now morphed from a newspaper into a more of a magazine format. As you can see, Jim Parkinson and the typographer, and Roger Black kind of modernized the Rolling Stone logo in the late 70s. No longer is it this hand-drawn sketch, but now it takes those basic principles and made them that three-dimensional look, the filigree hash marks, all those things are still there, but it's just modernized and updated. So those certain key DNA seem to be a reoccurring thing in Rolling Stone's design language. And of course, photography, getting in close to the subject, they became hallmarks of Rolling Stone's brand identity. So that how the publication shot images is also very important. And as you can see throughout time, this was in the 90s, Fred Woodward era, the logo got modernized again, more streamlined, slicker. It's probably the most famous version of the logo. But as you can see, the use of rule lines is still an active part of the design language. And then when I came on board I came on board in 2007. So this is a 2010 cover. That logo is still there, but still using some of those kind of Oxford rules, but just interpreting them in a different way to separate and segment headlines on the cover. Very Rolling Stone kind of thing to do, just kind of modernizing it for that time. So we went through another major redesign. I guess it's now been 2 years now. And there were big reasons for reimagining Rolling Stone at this point in time. And I think it's an interesting case study to dive through. Why did we change Rolling Stone just recently? And we had to define its mission again. Again, I started out the presentation by saying that what is the point of the publication? And for the print edition, times have changed. You know, Rolling Stone was a news and entertainment magazine that was produced, twice a month. So every 2 weeks it would come out. But now that we have the rollingstone.com is coming on very strong. A lot of people are accessing their information every day, every minute online. That's a big part of our way of getting our journalism out is digitally. So that means is getting a magazine every 2 weeks to try to be a quote unquote news magazine, is it relevant anymore? And we decided, no, we're gonna go a different route with the print publication to sharply define it differently from online. So online, yes, we can still do in-depth coverage, but typically online you get more up-to-the-minute, fast, quick news. Where the magazine difference is, it becomes a more monthly keepsake. Here are things that you really want to dive into. You want that more luxurious experience of physically reading something and immersing yourself in something. So now Rolling Stone is becoming a monthly magazine as opposed to every 2 weeks. So therefore the format, mission, the look, the design all had to change. So one thing we did was we started with the logo. So as you know, this is Rick Griffin's original, which is still great, by the way. But what we did was we wanted to update the logo for how we're using it today. You saw earlier Roger Black's kind of modernization. Jim Parkinson did that version. And then the more famous one, which is the one at the bottom, Jim Parkinson did that update as well. But one thing we thought was, it has a great history and it looks great. It's a very iconic design. But we thought for the modern era, we needed to modernize it, make it more streamlined, maybe lose some of the antiqueness because we're going to use it in both digital and in print. So this is the new version, which we launched 2 years ago. It's just we got rid of the dimensionality and made it more streamlined, and each letter form had to be redrawn to be bolder and thicker so that it could stand on its own. And we kept with our history. Jim Parkinson did the one in the late 70s, he did the one in the 80s, and he did this one as well. So there's that nice continuum of having the person who really knows this logo the best rework this again. And Jim Parkinson used to be the official typographer of Rolling Stone back in the 70s. How did he get that job? Anyway, so it was great to work with him on reinvigorating this logo for a modern time. And part of the reason why we had to reinvigorate it is, we have Facebook, Twitter, and all kinds of social media assets now, so you need an avatar that works well in those formats. So we have an abbreviated version of Rolling Stone that works flat like this in bold, and still communicates the brand and the brand identity. There's something about that R is so distinctive for Rolling Stone, and we made that a virtue in this RS monogram to be used in social media and other kinds of things like that. That also meant, you know, thank God for the company called PMC. They bought Rolling Stone, and they were the driving force behind, you know, really reinvigorating the brand. And so much so, thank goodness, the owner of PMC, his name is Jay Penske, he really loves books. He loves the physicality of books, and he owned an imprint as well. So the quality of printing was important to him. And if we were going to turn into a monthly keepsake magazine, that meant that the form factor of the magazine had to be the best it could be. So he really invested in going back to the oversized size of Rolling Stone that it had become famous for. During more leaner times, we had to shrink the magazine down. So now he restored that larger size, that almost 10-inch wide by 12-inch height. So when you open that book up, you know, it kind of floods your field of vision because you're dealing with like 20 inches wide of paper and almost 12 inches of height. You know, it just really floods your field of vision, which is a different experience from looking at your phone. So you can appreciate what the physicality of it in a better way. Also, we improved the paper stock tremendously, and the color. We went to a new printing plant. So all of that became a much more impressive looking publication. So here is the launch edition on the right, you know, and we'll get into some of the design there too, but just making sure that it felt like something that you could treasure and keep a hold of. It had this kind of soft coat finish to it. The paper was nice and bright and white on the inside, very nice. So we had to create a new aesthetic. And that is, you know, Rolling Stone still had to be its, you know, kind of scrappy self. We still did in-depth reporting and wanted to stay, you know, report on what the artists are doing and what deep reporting is happening in politics. But again, the whole experience had to be more luxurious, more of a keepsake, because we're now monthly, but we had to keep that authority in check. So we did that with new typography, but we kept certain basic rules in place. Is the typeface appropriate for the brand or appropriate for the kind of stories we do? Does it look good? Is it attractive? And most importantly, how readable is it based on how we're printing it and using it in print? So with all these basics in mind, we kind of gathered new typefaces that we thought would work well for the brand new Rolling Stone. And you're seeing a number of typefaces here. These are all the typefaces we use in print and online. But I would caution, the fewer typefaces you use for your publication, the better. And I try to keep that tight no matter what publication I work on. And I remember going to the LA Times, and we redesigned that paper, and we, you know, developed a set of typography that we thought would work for the LA Times. And the designers were like upset in the features department in particular, like, wait, that's so confining. There's only one, you know, there's only one headline, and how can we be creative? Well, there's a lot of ways you can be creative with one typeface. And because what it does force you to do is really get to know that typeface, really get to push its boundaries and limits, but also you're focusing more on what the content is. What is the message, and not what font am I going to use? You know, you're focusing more on, well, what is that illustration going to look like? What is that photography going to look like? What is that language of that headline going to look like? And how can I make that the most powerful message it could be? As opposed to, well, let's try this font one day, let's try another font another day. The other reason why you want to keep your font choices really tight is you're creating a brand identity, you're creating a look. So if someone tears a page out of your publication, you want there to be such a distinct brand identity that everybody knows it's, you know, your publication, the New York Times, or everybody knows it's Rolling Stone or what have you. So really keeping a tight lid and tight kind of collection of typography or fonts is very important. So we went with Publico because it was nice and sturdy, had nice broad set of weights. That's the dominant headline font. We do have a guest appearance here and there from Cheswick, because sometimes you need something that is a little bit sweeter and brighter. But Graphique Bold is used a lot in kind of our sans serif kind of headlines, where it's maybe the tone of the story is a little bit bolder. Say, for example, maybe it could be a heavy news story or something, but typically Graphique is used in sidebars, captions, and those kinds of things as well. So just a kind of a tight, kind of small grouping of fonts is all you need. Just make sure the fonts have a wide range of weights. Weights help, as long as you have a nice range of weights. That's a good thing. So here's some of the typefaces in action. So here is Publico. So this is a story, a cover story about Halsey, pop music star, so you kind of have a little bit more fun and playfulness with the typography. This is a very heavy weight of Publico. But this is also the same font. So this is a totally different story about gun smuggling in Texas, which is a completely different tone from a pop music star. So as you can see, the range of stories that appear in Rolling Stone really are wide. And therefore, we have to have typefaces that can work in both of those scenarios. They can be playful as well as more serious. And some of it is how you use those typefaces, what weights you use and what colors you use. But also, it's still the same font, so you have that continuum as you go from page to page in your publication. One of the most important pages of a magazine anyway is the cover. And we've done a lot with our covers over the years, but these are some more recent ones, and the photography is incredibly important. So as we went to this oversized publication again, we really wanted to make sure we really had a more fresh and creative look at the photography as well, but also go more minimal with the typefaces and type on the cover, so that the photo could shine, and B, a lot of our readers subscribe to the magazine. So although newsstand is important, it overwhelmingly, we have a much broader range of subscribers, number of subscribers than newsstand sales. And also, how does this look in social? How does it pop, in your Instagram feed and things like that? So what we've kind of done is pared back the typography and a number of headlines on the cover and emphasize photography and that key headline on the cover, so that we have a fresh, more modern, but also impactful visual cover. And sometimes we don't go with any cover lines at all, because sometimes the message of the visual is strong enough. And then sometimes we have fun. This is a younger artist, obviously. So, and there was something interesting about all those diagonal lines. So that was the inspiration of playing with the typography for that. And that's bringing out Graphique, which is a rare appearance on the cover, but it seemed appropriate for her. And this is our climate crisis special issue featuring Greta Thunberg with Shepard Fairey as the illustrator here. Kind of graphic. So as you can see, the visual really commands the cover. So one of the things I've always said over the years is really maximize what the medium is. When we were in newspapers, I was, during the California fires, it was, for me, my first time. I lived on the East Coast. So when I moved to California and the fires were raging one particular season, and we had great photographers at the Los Angeles Times on staff. And it's like they were bringing back incredible photos. So I was able to convince the team to really devote like a whole spread just for photography each day of those fires. And what I stressed was, we can do something with newspapers at that time that you can't get online. And the newspaper is this huge, giant, unfolding sheet of, this big spread So why not really immerse people in the tragedy of what is burning here in our state at the time and run images in such a large way that they can really see the detail. So we did that at the LA Times, and we're doing that here with the Rolling Stone. Now, of course, our sheet isn't as big as a newspaper, but how do you use the medium to its fullest to have the biggest impact? And that's what we went for at Rolling Stone. So we have access to great photographers. So when you see this spread in your hands at nearly 20 inches wide, it's just, you just are immersed in it. So photography and room for photography and creativity in photography is so vitally important to Rolling Stone, and separating why buy the print edition at all, that you can really immerse yourself not only in the reading experience of the story, but also some very creative imagery. So this is a shoot of Lizzo, obviously by David LaChapelle. But you have to have what I call peaks and valleys in your publication. So you just looked at the cover story of Lizzo, which was big photography, but you need to balance that out with other kinds of pacing. So as you look at your entire magazine, pacing becomes important. So let's talk, and the mix of stories becomes important, and what is next to what becomes important. So let's talk about this. What is this we're looking at? This is a map of one issue of Rolling Stone. So we get map, I don't know if that's a common term or not, but that's what we call it at Rolling Stone. So essentially it's from the cover to the back of the book, what is on each page of the magazine. Is it an ad? Is it an editorial? Where does the TLC go? Where does the masthead go? Where does the front of the book matter go? What ads are facing those pages? Are there any restrictions on those ads? For example, shockingly, alcohol, like beverage ads, like beer or whatever, they don't want to be near, death. They don't want to be near, like someone who, we may be doing a story about celebrity X who used to have a drinking problem and is now over it. So maybe the story is a positive spin that now he's, he or she is doing quite well and recovering, but the beer ad doesn't want to be anywhere near that, so, or if it's a chewing tobacco ad, they cannot be near anything that has children in it. And, we cover culture, and there are a lot of very young pop stars out there who are under 21. So all of that gets mapped out here for not only for several reasons. Obviously, I just dove into the advertising reasons for a second. And therefore, my job is to kind of look at the whole map, talk with the editor about what is the mix of stories, and then talk with the advertising department about what is facing what, to avoid any kind of controversial edit next to any kind of advertising restriction, and negotiate that, The other thing I look at here is just overall pacing. Like as the pages start coming together, when we were working in the office, we had this wall in the art department, where as each page gets designed, we hang that page in its position next to the ad that it's going to face. And we could kind of get a sense of what the entire publication is going to look like. And that's important for let's set aside the ads for a second. That's even important just for edit. Like, are we doing too much of the same kind of design treatment? Or do we have too many photos of the same scale? Are some of the pages becoming monotonous for design reasons? Whether the format of the page is too monotonous? Do we have enough scale shift or change? So you can really get a sense of what the flow of your magazine is just by kind of hanging all the pages on the wall and really getting to see what the whole book is going to look like and where we need to maybe make some changes. The other thing too is it could be just, even though designer and editorial is working on the design of a page independently, the creative from the ad agency may come in, and lo and behold, there may be similar scale of the subject in the photographs on both the ad and the edit, and that becomes a problem, a conflict. So by seeing it all on the wall at once, we can move things around and hopefully solve that problem. So now we do that virtually. We kind of make PDFs, but it was great to just hang stuff up on the wall and see it all. And the other thing I mentioned, alluded to this earlier, is peaks and valleys. You know, so you tend to, what we do at Rolling Stone, of course, and most magazines, is they have like what I call the appetizer at the beginning, you know, like kind of short bits of information, right? You know, like the table of contents and maybe the editor's letter, the letters page, kind of little short bits of information. But then after that, what we did at Rolling Stone was, since we want to stress visuals, is we have this surprise, something we call opening act, which is like a spread photo right after that front of the book matter that kind of is almost like a welcoming into the magazine that, yes, you are in a music magazine. So the point of opening act is to get some behind the scenes look at something interesting. So this at the time was when Bruce Springsteen was doing his big Broadway run, one-man show on Broadway, and here's what his dressing room looked like. And people, again, don't forget the physicality of this photo. This is printed on a 20-inch wide, you know, spread, physical spread that you can really dive in and see what is on his table and who is he, why, and look at the pictures on his mirror and who is that, and kind of, you know, seek some inspiration, like there are notes from Bono and other people that are stuck to the mirror and whatnot. And it really gives a reader information and a look at someone that they admire in a different way. And it's visual, so it breaks that pacing of the front of the book of all those small little kind of letters, pages, editor's notes. Here's like this big pop right in the middle of all that to kind of break that rhythm. Then soon after that, we have what is called the mix. And again, the mix is kind of our front of the book section. Now we're into music stories, and we always lead off each section with kind of a big photo, almost like its own mini cover, so that you have these big signposts as you go through the magazine that says, now I'm in another section of the magazine. And it's important to have that kind of big break so you know you're navigating through the magazine. So this happens to be the opener for the mixed section of stories. And it jumps into pages that look like this, you know, spending what it's like for spending the time with this band behind the scenes when they're not performing, you know, access, you know, seeing what the lives are like of these artists is important to our readers. So immersing people in that visual is interesting. And then you have other short bit items like this. And the reason why I show these is we kind of look for alternative storytelling methods in the mix section. So we know later in the book, you're going to get into some longer in-depth stories. So to contrast that, we have these kind of alternate storytelling ideas. So the playlist is like a list of 10 things that editors really are recommending to you, the reader, to listen to or to watch, all the way over to Drake's domination on the charts. And we did that in the form of an information graphic to kind of outline some of his songs and just how he is just completely taken over, you know, the top 10. So we're looking at alternate storytelling ways to kind of get readers information in an interesting and kind of highly visual way, because we know later in the book, there's going to be a lot of words coming. So that's what I mean by peaks and valleys. You have these short little kind of appetizers in the beginning before you get to the meat, and the meat is coming. So, you know, there may be some written through pieces in there. But then we have interesting things like, you know, when bands were performing, you know, what their set list was from a particular live show, recent live show, and see, that shows our access to, and interview Bono or about why they chose those songs in that list and tell a little bit more information about them. So that's Bono speaking about that set list, you know, and giving the reader information. And we could introduce maybe a new artist, you know, to the scene with a beautiful photograph. So as you can see, this is all in one section. You know, look at the different forms of storytelling and look at the rhythm that's being created by having different ways of communicating information. So this is kind of, you know, kind of a thumbnail of what one particular mix section looks like, just kind of the rhythm of it. And then you may have like a pop of a big photograph in there as well, just to mix up that rhythm. But as I mentioned, there is meat. You know, we get into long stories in here as well, as one of the other pillars of Rolling Stone is national affairs and political coverage and in-depth coverage. So usually, and again, each section starts with a big signpost. So as you saw, Troy's as the opener for the mix. Now we've got this political illustration by Victor Juhas opening national affairs, and Rolling Stone has a long, long history of illustration. You know, as you more famously may remember, you know, Ralph Steadman and Hunter S. Thompson were a great pairing for political coverage in Rolling Stone. Ralph Steadman did some really incredible illustrations, but now we're working with Victor Juhas and some others, but Victor really kind of has this biting edge to his illustration. So in this case, he's leading off the national affairs piece section with his illustration. But a lot of those stories are, you know, very dense and text heavy, as they should be. So this is in stark contrast to the mix where you have a lot of short things. But even on this national affairs page, you'll see on the top after the opener, there's something called the long view, which in that case is kind of a look back at, you know, a particular issue. In this case, it's Mitch McConnell and how he is an obstructionist, and give you in a timeline format information and facts about how he was an obstructionist over time. So even though the main bar, the main story may be on another topic, there's still a choice for the reader to have shorter bits of information cut in. One other thing I like to touch on too, because I noticed it even at the LA Times when we were looking at photo essays and now at Rolling Stone, is there's a real skill to working with multiple images for one story. And the biggest advice I would give is really be harsh in your edit. You know, really let only the best things rise to the top. And oftentimes, fewer images that are run better can be more impactful than running a lot of images. Now there's exceptions to everything, you know, like and you know, like for example, well, there's exceptions to everything, but in general, you know, when you're working with a feature package, it's better to kind of run fewer and make sure each one has a specific purpose and try to avoid redundancy if you can, and really edit ruthlessly. So let's look at an example here. Oh, that's the other thing too. As you're putting multiple images together, look for contrast. Sometimes a photo that could run like almost a spread wide may have like a little tiny focal point, maybe a little person in amongst all this vast negative space. But then if you put like a big face that's small, but the face is so big right next to it, what will attract the attention? Probably that little picture of this big face, you know, because it fills the frame so much, and it could overwhelm the kind of mood that maybe the more open image that's larger has. So really look for what's in the frame and how they play against each other. So this was a story on the survivors who, this group of people were trying to escape with their lives from massacres, and they are people without a country now. So they had to leave their homeland in order to seek refuge elsewhere or be killed, frankly. So a photojournalist spent time with them, and we did a deep story about this topic. So obviously this opening illustration kind of illustrates that exodus, you know, what they are just walking away with the clothes on their back, whatever they had at their disposal. And the lead of the story kind of started off with this woman and how her husband was killed by these folks, and you know, she just had to escape with her children. So the photographer had this beautiful portrait of her, and then of course smaller we see her family members, and then at the very bottom how her neighborhood, lack of a better word of saying it, was decimated. So it's a really powerful, gripping story. And as you can see, it's just how do we play the images off of each other? There was a lot of images here to choose from, but we really tried to pick the images that really spoke and had the most impact What kind of life are these people who are escaping living now? What kind of horrors did they escape from, and what is the evidence of that horror? And that's shown here by the injuries. What is it like to escape from these lands? And you have a map here that kind of shows the terrain, but also we were able to capture, one of the boats, or if you want to call it a boat, that they used to escape with. So each frame carefully tells a story. So as they escape, they arrive at these camps, these refugees camps, to seek shelter in another country. And what does that look like? So really each frame kind of tells a bit of that story. And sometimes just running fewer frames in a much larger and impactful way can resonate with the reader very powerfully, I think. Mm-hmm. So here's how it all spreads out as far as just like the rhythm of the imagery goes throughout these pages. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing that, it takes a number of rounds. And the other thing too is, one thing I like to do with my own work, and I try to create an environment that's conducive to this, is to try things and talk about them. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, and I think it's important that, you need to identify a mentor, or you need to seek out feedback on your work and not take it personal. So you want to invite that honest kind of feedback about what does someone see when they see your layout, or when they look at your layout cold. Are they really understanding what the story is all about, or are they misled in any way? And really take, obviously it helps to have someone like Susan Mango Curtis do that critique for you. But you know what I mean? You've got to, here's what I'm trying to say. It's great to work with designers who just understand that it's all about the work, and how do we make this project better? It's not anything personal, it's about how do we tell the story the best way we can? Is this image the right image? Are we playing it the right size? And that kind of discussion is very healthy. And sometimes in the past, I know that some designers get kind of defensive, and it's not, don't get defensive. It's really, really about the work. And if you and I can't have a conversation about it, and you put it out there to the world, we reach 50 million people. You want 50 million people to be confused by what you're doing? No, that's not how it should work. So having that open dialogue is just an important thing. Just take it all in and make sure you can articulate, having read the story, having been familiar with the subject, the reasons why you're making some of the choice you are, but be open to what your editor is saying as well, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So what is the story about? That's the key thing. The first question I ask when there's a deep story like that Rohingya story I just went through, I want to read the story, and if there is one, and sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the story is being created as we're trying to create the photography too. So that just means you need tight communication with your edit team and your photo team to make sure everybody knows what the focus of the story is, and if it changes direction, you've got that change. But let's say you're a designer and some of that front-loaded work has already been done. Make sure you read the story, so that as you are looking at the art and making decisions about what photo to use, it's an informed decision. And some of it could be informed by, the image is just so impactful. So maybe this specific incident isn't in the text, but it really indicates something about what the issue is all about. That is valid too. But it's important that you know what the message of the story is, so that you can really pick the visuals that really amplify that. What is the tone? Is the tone a serious tone? Is it upbeat? Is it a surface story? And then how does the typography kind of communicate those values to the reader? So let's go through some of those. Again, the rules of typography. Is it appropriate? Does it look good? And can you read it? Let's keep all those in mind. So with this Rohingya story, we went pared back. The pictures were so powerful. We didn't need a ginormous type headline type treatment to compete with the photography here. So we went with something very small in Publico, but we used the cuts, to kind of get at something going wrong, how the typography is split, just really subtle things, because really the photography is the star here. On the flip side, here is this story about Sia, who refused to be photographed. So we commissioned Nigel Buchanan to do this portrait of her, illustrated portrait of her. And because Nigel used these really incredibly bold pop colors and shapes, we riffed on that in the typography as well. So that's the other thing. When we design artistic type typography treatments, we kind of seek inspiration from the artwork itself. What are some of the colors that are being used? Are there big, bold shapes in the artwork that maybe we can riff off of in how we use the typography? Those kinds of things. So we want to make sure that the image and the typography kind of complement each other and work with each other. So here's another one, more recent, in the time of COVID, people are just on their own in isolation. So Anna Juan kind of came back with this really disturbing but cool illustration of, as you see here, and I kind of riffed on that, just really played down the headline to be very quiet on its own, and how her hair, is tangling her up. I used that, I don't even know if it shows up on your screen, but I used those kind of vertical lines underneath of the headline to kind of riff on that. So very quiet, kind of, somber kind of presentation here. And then I'm showing these because sometimes, at least at Rolling Stone, we'll do a whole issue on a topic. So this is that climate crisis issue, and we kind of have to create a system that could work with a number of different kinds of stories and different kinds of visuals. So in this case, bold, condensed kind of graphique XX, which is the super condensed typeface, with a bold border around all the pages to kind of signal, that this is all one package that really needs your attention and is urgent. And of course, the grid of colors that kind of show from cool to warm, because the global warming as the icon in the upper left, kind of all works together as a system across. This was like, if I remember correctly, like 24 pages of reporting here. So in summary, I went through a lot of issues there, so I'm happy to do Q&A and stuff like that. So in summary, just what is your publication all about? Do you understand the mission of your publication? And how do your design choices really echo that? And then also, as you're designing a specific story, make sure that each choice you make really amplifies something about that story, whether it be the tone, are there certain key facts that need to be pulled out of the text that become little sidebar kinds of pullouts that can add levels of information that make it easier for the reader to understand. Those kinds of things are important as you establish the aesthetic for your publication. And make it visual. People like to be shown things. Show me, show me what it looks like. How does it look? So the more you can make things visual, if it's statistics, is there a way to do an information graphics that shows the contrast of certain values of things? Think in those terms, that'll help the reader really understand what the information is. And then of course, step back and look at your story. How does your story pace itself out over several pages? And then how does that story relate to the overall magazine and how the flow of the entire magazine looks? Are you getting, and that also depends on what kind of publication you are. I mean, you can have beautiful pages that are super text heavy. If you're a magazine about reading, then the size of your text and the readability of text is super important, and maybe your publication is more gray, but maybe you have contrasting white space to make the eye have some areas of relief on the page. So it really, you have to understand obviously what your publication is all about and match the design to that. But then again, of course, map out the entire publication to see, do you have those peaks and valleys? Do you have signposts to guide you through different sections of the publication? Do you have, little charts or things like that that will make the stories more accessible, really map it out. And of course, at the end, hopefully your content is compelling. You have good stuff to work with. You know, the bottom line is, you know, we want readers to spend as much time with your publication and get enjoyment from or information from your publication as possible. So hopefully the content itself is very strong, because that's also just as important as the design. All right, and I think that's it. So that's it. So I'm gonna open up the floor here. Let me see if I can stop sharing. How do I do this? Oh, there we go. Where's my mouse? Oh. Let's see if I can get my mouse to work. Oh, another feature story popped up. Zoe, she wants to get on there. How do I stop? Sorry, guys. Gotta figure out how to stop sharing. Let me, hold on. No, it just wants to show that story. She just wants to get in there. Something's going on with my mouse, guys. Hold on. Oh, it's connected now. Wow, I cannot get out of this. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Bonus feature story in there.